Welcome on the Vintage Aviation News YouTube channel. As usual, thanks for following us. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the little bell down here so you'll be notified every time we go live with a new video. Today we are at the Pitcher DeKalb Airport, our home, if you will, and in an old World War II tower with John Slemp, photographer, local photographer, who's been doing amazing work with aviation and other subjects, obviously. But today we are here to talk about this great book. If you've been reading our website, you're familiar with this book. We have covered a few times, and today we decided just to talk about the book since it's out in museums and libraries and bookstores all over the country. John, before we talk about the book, let's talk about a little bit about yourself. So we know you're a great aviation photographer, but you are what I like the most about your work is your portraits really are one of a kind. I don't want to go too deep already in the type of photography you do, but that's one of my favorite things of your work. So talk about a little bit about your background and your, I guess, connection with aviation.
Right. Thank you, Mo. I appreciate it very much. So I've always had an interest in aviation since childhood. My father was in the service. I was born in Japan, and we lived in a lot of different places. And actually, when I went into the service, I tried to fly helicopters, but my eyesight wouldn't permit it. But I've always been interested in it. And in 2007, I finally decided to quit being so much of a generalist and specialize a little more, and I chose aviation because I enjoy photographing people. I enjoy photographing things outdoors. I know how to do studio work, but I enjoy location work, because the world is ever changing. It's a tableau that's unmatched in the variety, so to speak, and so aviation provides endless fascination in all those areas.
Sure.
And in 2014, I had known about these jackets for a long time, but I had never seen one. And I belong to EAA 690 in Lawrenceville, Georgia, Experimental Aircraft Association. And I asked around in the chapter if anybody had a jacket. I'd like to see it. And lo and behold, somebody had their uncle's jacket, and they brought it in, and I photographed it, and it was spectacular. He had been a top turret gunner, B-24 top turret gunner in the Mediterranean theater, and had flown 50 missions, and I had 50 bombs on it and artwork on the back of the jacket. And through one of my clients, I had met a curator at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, Dorothy Cochran. So I sent her an email, just, "Hi Dorothy, this is something I'm working on, but you might be interested." And 58 minutes later, I got a separate email from their curator of the aviation clothing collection, Dr. Alex Spencer, and he says, "We have 15 jackets that'll work for your project. When can you be here?" I was shocked, stunned, elated, thrilled, all those things. And a few months later, we made arrangements, and I went up there and wound up shooting 13 jackets. And from there, the project just sort of grew. Because initially I had no real thought of producing a book. I thought it might be interesting to talk about lighting techniques on, online on Facebook or whatever, and maybe an exhibition, but it just continued to grow from there.
Sure.
But thank you about the portraits. I've always been interested in photographing people. It's just an endless variety of faces and stories.
Sure. And the book does have quite a few portraits as well.
Yes.
So it's not only jackets.
Yeah, we photographed over 160 jackets across the country in 12 different museums, and of course from private collections.
Sure.
And 104 are in the book. And we photographed over 25 World War II veterans, 16 original Rosies. They're not in the book, but I did get a chance to photograph some of them, and 16 original WASP, Women Air Force Service pilots.
Fantastic. Now, you talk about the technique, and I've seen you photographing these jackets. So it's one of a kind technique to photograph these jackets because you can't hold them and take a picture like that horizontally. You developed a whole system which is what, vertical photography, or is there a name, or is something that you came up with? Try to describe it how you do it, because
Right.
it's very unique.
Yes, there's a very well-known, probably one of the most famous photographers in the world, named Albert Watson in New York, and he has done. It's not a new technique. Let me put it that way, but he's photographed some very unique things across the world, and as he says, in a very similar fashion, on a light box essentially, and he says just about any commercial photographer who knows what they're doing can do the work, but he said nobody else did. And, you know, so I thought about that, and, you know, and it just seemed logical to me to photograph them, to create a light box that's lit from underneath. It's a 4 foot by 4 foot piece of plexiglass. And I lay the jackets down on the plex, and I have a light coming. So if this is the jacket here, for instance, it's lit from underneath all the way around, and there's another light here coming across because I wanted to show a little bit of texture.
Sure.
And then I have 3 bounce cards. We call them fill cards. They're just white cards that bounce the light back onto the jacket. So you get a little bit of soft light and a little bit of hard light, which creates the texture at the same time. And I get up on a ladder, a 6 foot tall ladder, and basically shoot straight down on the jacket. I knew when I started, I didn't want to spend a lot of time in Photoshop cutting out jackets from the background and that sort of thing. And I wanted the jackets to stand on their own, just as an item, a unique item, just by itself. And so I tried that out on the first jacket. It worked fine, and stuck with it for the whole project.
John, tell us a little bit about your photography background. Did you go to school? You have formal training? Taught yourself?
Well, initially I was self-taught. I bought my first camera in 1984, January, as I remember. And I entered the U.S. Army photo contest a few months later. I was stationed in Europe at the time, and wound up winning a first place in the people category. And there were several thousand entries. And I was like, well, this is fun. And so I entered again the following year, won another first and a third, and the following year another first, and maybe there's something to this. So when I got out, one of my friends suggested I try it for a living. And I came here to Atlanta. I had met my wife by then, and we got married, and I went to school at Portfolio Center where they taught advertising photography. And that's where I learned there's a difference between taking pictures and making pictures. And there's a lot of folks who can buy a nice DSLR now. There's, you know, all the cameras are generally very good quality nowadays as far as the file they produce and that sort of thing, the colors and so on. But it's a mindset, you know, and I tell people that probably the most valuable photographic tool you have is between your ears. You know, all the cameras are essentially the same. They're a box that catches light. You know? So, you know, when I create a photograph, I'm trying to create something that's unique, but also my interpretation of that subject, whatever it might be. And I think that's the real difference between taking pictures and making pictures.
And I agree. I think, in my opinion, what a photo should generate an emotion. I think when you look at it, if it doesn't, that means you didn't do a good job. And I think with this book, that's what you exactly did. Because when you look at these photos, you feel like you can almost touch the jacket, and you can almost feel the person that wore that jacket. So that's, I think, the difference between just taking a photo and making a photo. Then the Smithsonian, I guess, was that spark that led this idea, and you realize that, well, maybe there is something to it. There's more to it. And how do you go from talking to the Smithsonian and then photographing 104 jackets all over the U.S. basically? It must have been a pretty big search and a lot of back and forth with owners and stuff.
It was. You know, it just sort of evolved, to be honest with you, Mo. After I did the jacket at the Smithsonian, it became apparent to me that maybe there is something more to it than this. And because of my contacts here in town with the 8th Air Force Historical Society and so on, I knew Punchy Powell and some of the other local veterans from World War II, and so I just, in the back of my head, I said, let's do some portraits of these guys just while they're here and see where it goes. And so I started doing that, and eventually the idea came about to create a book. I knew there's several other books that were done 20, 25 years ago, but they were not professionally photographed, and they don't really have much background information about the men, and women for that matter. And I thought that was an important part of the story that needed to be told.
Sure.
And so I started gathering information, and this all started in 2014. And the book came out in December of last year, 2022, so it was an 8-year project, and essentially. And I've always been interested in World War II history ever since childhood. And so I started gathering the stories and interviewing some of the men as much as I could, and doing the portraits, and it just started to coalesce into what I envisioned to be a book that I would like to read.
Sure. We are at an airport here, so you might hear some background noise, jets going in and out. We are not gonna edit that sound off because we like the sound of airplanes. So I think the most important thing about this project, yes, the photography, yes, the jackets, but the stories behind these jackets. I think we are all fortunate to have warbirds and vintage airplanes flying around, but I think very few things can really connect a person to us as much as a jacket, because that's something that a person worn for quite a few years. And so tell us a little bit about the feeling.
It's funny you mention that, because the first jacket I photographed, when I photographed all of these jackets and all the portraits with a medium format camera, which means it's extremely high resolution. I can make a 30-inch by 40-inch print, and it looks spectacular. I mean, it looks like you can touch the jacket. And actually, we have an exhibition going up here sometime soon at the Military Aviation Museum in Virginia Beach, and those prints are going to be 6.5 feet tall, and they're going to put them right on the wall. And I didn't have to increase the file size very much.
Sure.
And they looked, when I blew them up to 100% and looked at them on my screen, they looked fantastic.
Sure.
So we're really excited about that. But going back to that first jacket, when I blew it up to 100%, I'm looking at the collar, and you can see the grime in the collar where the guy sweated and you know, worked in that jacket. And that just was an instant connection for me. And having been in the service myself, you know, I've dirtied a few uniforms, you know.
Sure.
And it just, I couldn't get past that, you know. And a lot of people have told me that the jackets are very much something that they feel connected to the man
Sure.
who wore it,
Sure.
you know. And I'm glad to have been able to bring that out, to be honest.
So John, I'm sure you met a lot of great men, unique human beings, and with a lot of experiences. But two veterans are very special to us, because they were one was our friend Punchy Powell, and one still is our friend Paul Crawford, who's going to be 100 years old next year. Both flew P-51s and in two different theaters. Punchy Powell in England or in Europe, and John Crawford and Paul Crawford in China. Tell us a little bit about them, your experience related to your work and related to them personally.
You know, I really connected with Punchy because he was from Bluefield, West Virginia area, and I graduated high school in West Virginia. And and my dad is from southwestern Virginia, which is not that far away. And so we really connected. We had some common ground there, but you know, he started telling me the story about the D-Day invasion and his involvement with that. And they took off at night. It was, I think he said, about 2:30 in the morning, so it was still dark, even though it gets bright very early in Europe in the summertime, you know, like at 4:30. And so they took off. There was one string of lights across the runway, otherwise they had total blackout. And when the first flight of 3 took off, they ran over the lights and put them out. And so they were operating in total darkness after that. So the next flight of 3 lined up, but in the confusion, another aircraft joined in, so they had 4 lined up where only 3 were supposed to take off. And one of them was slightly misaligned, and he took off and flew directly into the new control tower that was under construction, was immediately killed, big fire. But all the rest of the aircraft got off the ground safely, because of that one occurrence. And you know, it was a total shame. And actually, I went to Punchy's house. He lived here locally one time, and he basically had a museum in his basement.
Yes, I was about to say that.
And he showed me a piece of the melted aircraft that he picked up from that incident. And you know, so when you start holding the items and touching and talking to the people, it becomes very real. And you know, I felt throughout the whole project that I was actually touching history in a very direct way.
Sure.
Even though I didn't touch all the jackets, you know, the Smithsonian jackets I didn't handle, and most of the jackets at some of the other museums, the Air Force Museum, they had Jimmy Stewart's jacket, by the way, which I got to photograph. But you know, when you start interacting,
you put it in the
with
book?
these men, yes, it's in the book.
book.
Yes. But when you start meeting these men and talking to them and hearing their stories, and you know, having been in the service myself in the combat arms, fortunately I never got shot at, but you know, it's something you always think about. You know, how am I going to react under pressure in a situation where somebody's trying to kill me and I'm trying to accomplish a mission and that sort of thing. And the thing I think that really impressed me with these men was how well they handled themselves under that extreme pressure and accomplished the job and came back to the U.S., to the States, and crafted lives afterwards.
Sure.
You know, productive lives.
Sure.
And you know, Paul Crawford the same way. I got to photograph him, and you know, he was, I believe his wife worked for the Bobby Dodd, I believe,
sure,
at Georgia Tech. And, you know, he was well respected in the community, as was Punchy. And, you know, but you could tell that their wartime experiences were essentially the basis for their life.
Sure.
And I'm sure they always went back to it and thought about it and that sort of thing, but they used it as a launching point.
Sure.
For continuing on with their life and trying to create something positive, not only for themselves but for the country.
And you mentioned Punchy, and you mentioned Paul. Punchy's jacket is in the book.
It is.
And as well as Paul Crawford, who flew P-51s. Interesting fact about Paul Crawford, I don't know if you knew it, but he had two brothers. One was a B-17 pilot, and another one was a B-24 pilot. So they all left for the war, and they met again after a few years in the war on December 25th of 1945 in Americus, Georgia, which is a few miles south of here. So Paul is still alive. We see him occasionally. I go see him every once in a while, and the jacket is in the book. I have the fortune of having Paul's jacket at my house, and tell us about the story with Paul, which is
when I photographed
cool.
him, he told me his story, and essentially this is a condensed version, I'm sure. He was shot down in July of 1945 in China while he was flying a P-51 on his 29th mission, strafing a railroad facility, a train, I believe. And he bailed out and was helped by the communist Chinese. And over the course of the following 2 weeks, he walked essentially 200 miles
in the jungle
to escape the Japanese,
yeah.
And wound up at the compound of a Chinese businessman who had gone to school in the States. And if I remember correctly, he had married an American woman.
Sure.
And a few days later, the OSS, which is now the CIA, flew him and several other pilots out from a nearby airfield back to their units, I suppose.
Sure.
And he told me that he arrived back home to Americus, Georgia on Christmas Eve, 1945.
Sure. Yep.
And I'm sure that must have been a very special Christmas.
And he's got, since we are talking about jackets, he's got an interesting story about his own jacket.
Yes, he had the liner replaced, and apparently he had both an American flag and a bloodchit, CHIT, which was a marker that was in the China-Burma-India theater that all the pilots wore that identified them as Americans. And when the liner was replaced, the seamstress or whoever did the work threw away the bloodchit and put the American flag back in there. And I asked him, I said, Paul, did you shoot the guy? And he said, no, but I thought about it.
I see him every once in a while. I try to go see him as often as possible, and he still talks about it. He's still mad about it. So
no, I'm sure.
That's fantastic. That's awesome. That's awesome.
But you know, but when you meet these men, to me, they're the finest of the best. You know, they're the best of the best as far as America goes. And I've, you know, having lived around the world and served overseas myself, I've come to the conclusion that probably the best export America has is a GI. You know, it seems like every country that we get involved in, you know, in a shooting situation, we become friends with later on.
Sure.
They see that, you know, we're not the bad guys.
Sure.
You know, we do huge amounts of trading with Vietnam now, Japan, Germany, you know, all these countries. I'm sure it's going to happen in Iraq at some point.
Sure.
You know, and I'm firmly convinced that it's because of the character of the American people.
I agree. Now, this is a book project, so I'd like to close this interview with a specific reference to the book, because the book is just beautiful itself in every single aspect. This is something you want to put on your coffee table. The photography, the quality, the pages, and I think the really neat thing is the overall design, including this inside look profile, which we can show. This was actually Punchy Powell P51. So I think you pay attention to details, to you know, every single detail. I mean, it's impressive. Tell us where we can find the book, where is it available, and again, where people can purchase it.
Sure. The website is www.WWII World War II Bomber Boys with an S.com. I decided not to do just Bomber Boys because I didn't want the FBI showing up on my doorstep on Sunday morning. So I put WW2 in front of it. And the book is available there. It's 398 pages. It's 12 by 12 in size. It weighs almost 6 pounds, so it's not a small book. And we have
you also have amazing
illustrations.
Yep, exactly. You have also profiles, and it's there is more than just a photography of a jacket.
It's more than just a picture book. I tried to put as much stories in there as I could from all combat theaters of World War II. We have Jimmy Stewart's jacket in there, as I mentioned. Jay Zemer, who was a Medal of Honor recipient. Hub Zemke, who was a group commander in England and a triple ace. Just a wide variety.
Is there any specific jacket you like to photograph the most for whatever reason?
People ask me that. You know, it's like your favorite kid.
Yeah.
But you know, to be honest with you, one of the highlights was photographing Jimmy Stewart's jacket.
In fact, I'm trying to, since you have an index and a lot of books, you were saying that, you know, a lot of books don't have it.
Right.
But
his jacket, I think, is on page 192.
Okay.
I believe I have that memorized already. But we have not only stories of the men.
That's punchy.
And but we also have a chapter on how these jackets have influenced fashion and culture worldwide, written by a fashion historian. There's a section in there on collecting the jackets, written by Jeff Schrader, who's an appraiser for Antiques Roadshow. And there's a short FAQ section on care of the jackets, written by a professional conservator. So it's more than just a picture book.
I'm looking for Jimmy Stewart jacket, which I found it.
Okay.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about this jacket. This is
Jimmy's jacket. So this was at the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, and when right after I had photographed it, the lady who approved my request to come in, Roberta Carruthers, she's a collections manager. She came in and she said my request to photograph jackets actually did them a favor, and I'm like, how so? And she said it prompted us to get our hands on the jackets. I photographed 10 jackets there. And so some were in display cases, some were in storage. They pulled them all out, checked them for condition, that sort of thing. But she told me that this was only the second time since 1968 that Jimmy's jacket had been out of the display case.
Wow.
Which means nobody else has this picture.
See, one thing I just noticed while you were talking and talking about, you know, the personal connection and really feeling like the personal connection with the person. In this jacket, you can see here it says Lieutenant James Stewart.
Oh yeah.
With a pen, and very likely he wrote that. So yeah, I think it's just amazing. So
yeah.
Well, this is a great book. I've been a fan of it. I'm glad it finally came to fruition and came to production. So One more time, if you want to purchase this great book, it's on WWII Bombers, Bomber Boys. So
.com.
.com. Perfect.
Yes.
Right. Well, we'll put the URL underneath. So,
Yes.
John, thanks for being here, and you'll be up in Oshkosh, right? At the EAA shop right underneath the control tower with
Author's Corner.
a bunch of books. So if you don't want to buy it online, you want to buy it at Oshkosh, or do both, you can find John at AirVenture this summer. And as usual, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the little bell so you'll be notified once we go live. Thank you for watching.